The House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has announced that he has worked out a deal with the Biden White House on this debt ceiling, on extending the debt ceiling and preventing the government from going into a shutdown or a default on the debt. Now, Biden has been warning that a default on the debt will be catastrophic. And he has also said he's not going to negotiate. In other words, you basically have to just go along because otherwise we're just going to go into a collapse, almost implying that Republicans are forced to do this. Kevin McCarthy sort of did call that bluff, and eventually the Biden people came to the negotiating table. But the question is, who got the better of this deal? And I got to say that I think on the balance, the answer is Biden did. And this itself is a little shocking because you've got this decrepit Biden. You've got a guy who basically, I don't even think could really put his pants on, doesn't seem often to know where he is. Now, I'm not saying that he isn't surrounded by shrewd negotiators, but this is a case where the Republicans held all the cards because the Republicans could hold out. And true, the media would then, if there's a default, the Republicans are to blame. They're the obstinate ones. Who cares? The bottom line of it is people generally, when things turn south, if there's an economic slowdown or shutdown, they blame the president. He's in charge. He didn't work it out. Not to mention the fact that if he says, I'm not going to negotiate, then who's to blame for a deal not going through? So I think that here was a case where Kevin McCarthy could have driven a really hard bargain. And here's where Republicans tend to fail. They have an opportunity, the cards are in their hands, and then they make what is at best a kind of pallid, mediocre, give away too much type of deal. Now, this is not to say that there are not some good things in the deal. There are some good things in it. There are some caps on spending, although not on defense spending. The reason for that, by the way, is that there are several Republicans who are strongly in favor of Ukraine. They've inherited a sort of anti-Russianism all the way back from Soviet days. There are new allowances in the deal that open up energy permits that were previously closed off by the Biden administration. There are some work requirements that have been extended. So in other words, you get government entitlements, but not without a work requirement. Democrats have been fighting to have no work requirements. And finally, Democrats were trying to sneak in some tax hikes, and the tax hikes are basically shut out. So there are going to be no new taxes. But that's the good news, and it's not good enough news in my view. If you look at the Republican proposal, it had a lot of great ideas. Cut $131 billion in spending. The real cut that McCarthy seems to have agreed to, a modest cut, a 2-year freeze in spending, and even that seems to be questionable. There are $12 billion in top line cuts, but arguably that's being negated by other spending. The strong work requirements that Republicans had in mind for SNAP, also for Medicaid, it turns out that those were watered down. So there are some work requirements, but they're pretty minor. Number 3, the Republicans had the idea of shutting down Biden's $500 billion student loan bailout. And guess what? They didn't do it. The student loan bailout is largely upheld. There are some expiration dates set for some of you don't have to pay until the summer. So in some cases, the Biden people have agreed, all right, well, we're going to let that expire. People are going to have to start paying their loans. What about the big $80 billion that was given to the IRS to hire these 87,000 new IRS agents? Well, guess what? Modest cuts to the IRS, but no repudiation of these 87,000 agents. In fact, when I say modest cuts, the modest cuts are for the IRS to determine where to cut. So they can decide, well, we'll keep all the agents. We're just going to cut something over here. And again, these cuts are quite modest. They're really not what Kevin McCarthy should have gone for. And then finally, Republicans wanted to reclaim $50 billion in unspent COVID funding, and the Biden people agreed, okay, well, we're going to let you reclaim $28 billion. Now think about this. This is supposed to be a great victory. This is COVID money that was not spent. So why isn't all of it returned to the Treasury? But again, for Biden, it's like, well, we'll give half of it back. So this is overall a bad situation. Let's remember the big picture of it is this, and that is that government spending rose dramatically under COVID. It basically went up from around $2 trillion of government spending to almost $4 trillion. From $4 trillion to almost $6 trillion, so a $2 trillion increase. And the bad news about this deal is now it sets that kind of a foundation for the future. So in other words, we're talking about continually running up the national debt. We're talking about trillions of dollars of new spending. I'll talk more about this, but the national debt, which is around $30 trillion, could go up to $35, $40, $50 trillion. And this is, I think it was DeSantis who said, this is a country spending its way toward bankruptcy. Because, and again, Debbie was talking to me about it. She's like, well, what would be the implications of a government shutdown with essential services? I'm like, no, essential services would not be affected. And moreover, who cares? I mean, think about it. If you have a normal family budget and you're spending you're making, let's say, $100,000 and you're spending $130,000 every year. Well, that has to stop. And people can't say, well, we got to borrow more so we can continue the spending. Otherwise, my car payment is going to be affected. Who cares if your car payment is affected? Maybe you can't afford to have a car. Maybe you should be taking the bus. But the bottom line of it is this is the money you have coming in, and that's the money that you have to spend. So this is the attitude that Republicans should take, but don't take. And so Kevin McCarthy is running around saying, I got a good deal. And so I've held the line. I've stopped the Biden train. I think a lot of this is really bluster. I think when you look at the concrete results of the deal, well, it's not such a good deal. I think Republicans could have done a lot better. I'm seeing even moderate Republicans like Nancy Pace, who's come on this podcast saying, I'm not going to vote for this deal. Now, I don't know if they have the power to stop the deal. Why? Because, of course, the Democrats are going to be for it. The Democrats realize that Biden made this deal, so they're going to be all in on it. The Republicans don't have a big majority in the House. So I don't know how they're going to stop this deal. But I think that this is a case where I'm not going to say that Kevin McCarthy sold us out or Kevin McCarthy gave away the store, but I do think that he made a far less advantageous deal than he could have.